Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King. I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
I'm doing well, King. Always good to be here with you on Wednesday morning. So I'm ready to go.
Yeah, same here. Same here. And as we like to always get started with our gratitude moments, you want to share what you're grateful for?
Yeah, so I'm grateful for another morning with indoor plumbing and a refrigerator with fresh food in it, um, and access to that fresh food. If I want to go out and get some more, I can, and I take that as a blessing. I'm grateful for the roof over my head and the things that are underneath that roof. I rent a house, and I have a great landlord who built the house, who was here yesterday doing some work because he takes care of the property. Um, those seem like little things, but they're really important. And I'm just grateful to be reasonably healthy, both mentally and physically and emotionally, as far as I can tell. I'm trusting that you'll let me know if I'm not intellectually and emotionally healthy. um,
Definitely.
but just these basic things. I mean, I'm better off than many people on the planet, and I don't take any of it for granted.
Absolutely. And I'm grateful for my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have a sound mind. I'm grateful for another 24 hours to pursue my purpose and to grateful for a mother who's alive, who has good mind and still has loving spirit and energy. I'm grateful for having a place over my head and the challenges I have in my life and the ability to be healthy enough to be on this podcast with you, given today's climate, not only physically healthy, but mentally healthy as well. Today, I realized that in these times, you really got to fight for your right to be mentally sane because the amount of disinformation that's coming out is over the top on every level, and then you get other people talking about it. So anyway, just to be thankful to be mentally sane in this environment is where I'm going with that, and then physically healthy, and then finally, I'm thankful to be on the podcast with you and looking to build something here around this fully human connections movement. I want to advocate for just connecting with other people who are on this journey, and grateful to connect with those individuals when I can. We also like to share our spiritual energy number. And I'm a 10. And I say that first just because I'm kind of feeling with that kind of enthusiasm right now. From getting up and working out to also on this podcast and continue to do the work that I want to do to become more fully human. I'm eager to kind of share that. So I end up going first, but I'm a 10. That shows you my enthusiasm in that. So what's your spiritual energy number?
Yeah, so I'm also a 10. I was going to make a joke about, so I guess if you have a 10 for spiritual energy, you want to go first, it means that you're selfish. But that's just kidding.
I thought about that when I was saying it. I guess it's also starting to be selfish, but
Yeah.
you
No,
know,
not so. That's obviously I'm kidding. For all our millions of viewers and listeners, that was a joke. Not necessarily funny, but it was a joke. So yeah, I'm at a 10 too. I have good energy around this. I love what we do together, and it's very easy to have 10 energy. And again, we should say it's 10 out of 10. It's not 10 out of 100.
exactly. Yeah, we definitely get qualified.
Yeah.
We go straight to the 10 part. Thank you
Yeah.
for doing that. Absolutely. It's on a scale of 1 to 10, and 10 being the absolute highest you can be. You know, I ask that question every time, like I said, in meetings, when I meet people on conversations, and just hearing people's numbers are always interesting.
Mm.
Some people say I'm a 7, but I never say that I intentionally choose a 10. And if I say that to them after that, then they may say, okay, well, I choose an 8. They'll give themselves a higher number. But they very few will say if they're 7, they will jump straight to a 10 just off that statement. So it's interesting to see how people's answers are. Then some people say I'm 100.
Yeah. Which out
So
of 10 is actually impossible. So
yeah, exactly. And I'm really, you're saying you're 10 times, then excellent. But we can get into another time. I think it's an excellent segue into our topic. So why don't you take us into our topic, which I think is a very interesting one. I'm excited to get into.
Yeah, so for anybody that's joining us that hasn't joined us before, we've been speaking for almost 2 years now about Healing America's Narratives, which is a 2022 book that I put out. And we've been going through we went through one chapter at a time. We've tied it in with current events and historical events. And we're still doing that, but we're going to take a slight turn today, and we're going to speak about conversation. The book that preceded Healing America's Narratives by 2 years was entitled Enough with the Talking Points, Doing More Good Than Harm in Conversation, because it occurred to me, and not just to me, that there is such a thing as good faith conversation, differentiating opinions and facts. And even when we disagree with people, it used to be, I remember this from childhood and even in early adulthood, that I could have a disagreement and still be friends with somebody, or still be their parent or their kid or their cousin, whatever it happened to be. And while that's still true with certain people, there are, it seems, millions and millions of people for whom that's no longer true. And we speak in talking points, and people tend to think that their beliefs are their identity, and they don't know how to be in conversation if someone challenges their view or if something in the world challenges their view. So what we're going to do, and I'll just provide a quick overview of some of the things that we're going to be talking about in the coming weeks. Then we'll drill down into a couple of them today. We're going to take a look at some of the traits that I think are important in conversation. So today we're going to look at how culture, personality, and our worldview impact the conversations we're in. And you and I have been speaking about culture and worldview, not so much personality, as part of our ongoing conversations. So we'll drill down deeply today in terms of how those impact the conversations we're in. Moving forward, we'll look at things like preconceptions, judgments, and assumptions, things like avoiding labels and sweeping generalizations and insults, which seems obvious, differentiating opinion from fact, which most of us learned sometime in elementary school, and many of us seem to have forgotten. The importance of curiosity in conversation, and the value of not knowing in conversation, because not knowing is the best place from which to learn. Staying on topic, understanding emotions in conversations, and a lot of other things, which I don't have to name them all right now. But for today, one of the underlying topics you and I have been speaking about is cultural givens. So, the story of the world that we're given as kids, and what I believe is our ethical obligation to challenge as we grow up. Not that the story is always wrong, but inevitably parts of it are at least dated, if not absolutely wrong. And it's our obligation as adults to question that. If we don't question these cultural givens, and what ends up happening is we carry them with us. So if I'm in conversation with someone with whom I disagree, I'm going to be saying things based on what my parents and teachers gave me when I was 7 years old, or 5 years old, or 12 years old, whatever it was. And I don't even know that those are driving me. It's what Thomas Merton referred to as the anonymous authority of the collectivity speaking through my mask. And I love that phrase. So there's this anonymity that we're given, this authority, and it tells us how the world really is. And, there were times when the world, the truth was for millions of people that it was okay to enslave Africans. It was okay to subjugate women. It was okay to take land from and slaughter Native Americans. And then, the list goes on. That's just what I call the 3 primary subjugations. So it's important for us. Here's the shortcut. It's important for each of us to know ourselves and our worldview and make it conscious when we're in conversation. Otherwise, we can't tell when anger comes up or disagreement comes up or frustration or fear comes up, if it's because of us, if it's because of the other person or if it's mutual. So self-knowing is essential if we're going to be in good faith conversation. Last piece I'll say is that, and currently we have all kinds of Supreme Court cases going on. We have the former president in various trials, the one that's going on in New York City right now. And he's a great example of being unconscious in conversation. I don't want to make this about him, but he just says things that aren't true. He's been doing that his whole adult life, even before he was president. And some people admire that. They like that he pushes back, but he says things that simply aren't true. They're immediately provably false. And he continues to do that. So he's like a great example of how not to be in conversation. And that sounds like a flip thing to say. Like I can kind of laugh myself when I say it, but I mean it quite seriously because he was the president of the United States.
Right.
And the president of the United States carries weight when he, in this case, speaks from that office. Even if he's dead wrong, his words carry more weight than yours or mine do when we're having dinner or having, a couple of beers at a bar somewhere. We can say whatever we want, nobody cares. All right. But when the president speaks or somebody in that kind of office, it's a big deal. And he has proven that he doesn't care, that he'll continue to say things that are false or that are inflammatory because he can get away with it. So that's just one example. There are millions of other examples of private conversations we could point to. So I'll put a period there. We're speaking about the responsibility of knowing ourselves in conversation if we're serious about moving into a healing conversation and healing America's narratives at a larger scale.
Absolutely. I think this is such a great topic, definitely timely, because the climate that we live in that gets constantly fed to us, whether it's social media or regular media, is that we're more disconnected than ever before. And as you outlined last week, that's pretty much fake news because people are connected more than ever before. As far as, across racial lines, across gender lines, I'm surprised as most people I know. I think that most men I talk to now, and I really can't think of anybody on top of my head, are against being anti-gay. Like they don't have no issues with gay men at all. They've accepted the fact that that's a part of the culture we live in and the world we're going to live in. And that's not how they used to think 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. And so that shows me a lot of growth and where the potential of where we really are. But you said the media comes out, and I believe that creates the conditions you're talking about today, which is why people can't conversate, because they no longer understand that they're now just revisiting somebody else's talking points. And that's why I always like to say that, if you don't have a system for who you are, I mean, that you live in your life, that the current systems that that govern our behaviors are going to have you doing things that's not in your best interest.
Yeah.
But think it is. But think that it is in your best interest. Most people don't know how to really even listen because we never taught to listen. I think about, again, one of my favorite books of all times and authors of all times, Dr. Stephen R. Covey. He lays out the 7 habits, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And just think about how many people don't do that. And if you did that, as a way of life, how different the world would be, how different your outlook on the world would be, how different the energy around you would be. And I just want to kind of close on this point that the system engineer in me is always looking for a process, a system, or a way of being able to categorize something so I can know how to deal with it. And I realized that when I make connections, I came up with this based off everything you outlaid and what I've learned as far as human behaviors, personal development, is that when I connect with somebody, I'm looking for to build a conversation, 5 key areas. I'm looking at your identity first, who you identify yourself as. So if you identify as your race, then that's going to let me know a lot about who you are, whether you're black, white. You know, if you identify as your religion, that's going to tell me a lot about who you are. You identify as your gender, you identify as your country. When you make these your initial identity statements, then that's going to say a lot about who you are. And that's going to let me know if there's any alignment with connecting with you on that. Because I no longer identify myself in any of those areas. I've identified myself now as we talk about being fully human. I see myself as being human being. And that's how I identify myself in that context. And then if you identify yourself as a human being, I believe you see other people as human beings as well. And it's going to determine how we even greet each other and engage in conversation. Next is your purpose in life. 3 is your principles. The 4th is your energy. Your energy's off. I don't like your energy. And then finally, it's your mindset. You know, and you meet a person that has a human identity, a great purpose they want to serve. They're connected to that. They're governed by principles. They have the energy that I believe that operates off of love. I like to define that as love energy, and then a growth mindset. Then how could you go wrong in anything that you do, right? So I just want to share that as a response to the fact that I think that adding that to the conversation of how people really can't really conversate is also because, like you said, they've allowed themselves to be the talking points of the media that they're consuming.
Yeah, and I mean, our friendship, I think, is, not to dwell too long on that, but I think that, when we met, which would have been sometime in spring, I think, of 2022, it was the very things you just named that led us to be into ongoing conversation and become friends, because I'm high school teacher, basketball coach, teaching poet, and other things that I've done. You're a systems engineer. In terms of the professional lives that we had, one of us is black, one of us is white. We'll leave it to the audience to determine who's who. But we had this alignment or this attunement in terms of our belief in growth and development and constant learning. We generally agreed on a lot of topics, although we don't agree on everything specifically, which is great, probably healthy for us. But when we talk to each other, even if we hit a bump, and we rarely do, there's a trust there now, because we know each other reasonably well. We actually met in person, a couple of months ago for the first time. And we don't rely on sound bites and talking points in our conversations. We're not putting out 30-second, sound bites. And one of my biases is, and I wrote about this morning, that as technology allows us to say things to more people more quickly, and this is a writer's bias, and I know it, but I think it's worth saying out loud. More people who have less of value to say have both the ability and the desire to say it on a regular basis publicly. So what I mean by that, a lot of people will tweet or post on Facebook or Instagram or something else on X. I don't know what they call it now. We still say tweet. Aren't you Xing if you put it on X? I don't know. But people will do that who would never have written even an email, a long email, much less a letter, and put a stamp on it and sent it to somebody. So the technology, which has done certain things because we get to share across around the world now, and people in good faith can learn a lot from each other that way. So I'm not denouncing it. But the downside, and as Ken Wilber says, there's a dignity and a disaster to almost anything that exists. The dignity of this mass communication ability is that we get to communicate with people around the world relatively quickly. The disaster of it is because it's quick and because so many of us identify with what we believe. And if you think you are your beliefs, email me. I'll talk to you about that, because you're not. We're not our beliefs. But we fire off responses to things that we disagree with. We repeat things, which is really easy to do now because we call it reposting. You can just share something that somebody else wrote without ever doing any confirmation checks to see if it's true or accurate. And in a world now so in the last year, especially with the new AI capabilities, and they're going to get better and quicker on a weekly basis, it seems, but definitely on a monthly basis, you have to work hard to see what's true. And it seems as though that's too much work for some folks, and a lot of false things and even dangerous things get repeated. So back to knowing myself, each of us knowing himself, herself, theirselves. There is no shortcut. There's not an AI hack for that I know of. And I'm not an AI expert, obviously, but knowing yourself is knowing yourself. You got to do some work. What do I really believe? Oh, I believe this is true. Where'd that belief come from? Oh, because my grandfather used to always say it, or my father, or my first grade teacher, or whomever. Or that's what the culture at my job believes, and I have to believe that if I want to get paid, or whatever it is. What is it that I really believe, and why do I believe it, and what's the evidence that is at all valid? That's work that needs to be done before we open our mouths publicly in conversation, I believe.
Now, I agree with you 100%. See, and to me, that is the kind of work that has to be done in order for me as a consultant and a connector to build someone a system. Because if you don't have the answers for that, then I can't really build a system, because we're not going to have anything in alignment. And even though the system can work and I see it work, but I'm not here to help someone put out disinformation just to make money.
Yeah.
I have to agree with what your message is and who you are as an individual, as a person. If I'm to help a person grow their influence and grow their network, because nowadays I think most people are at a level of being taught consistently to sell out for the dollar.
Yeah.
That as long as, I mean, I can't watch even though I like this era and I predicted this era would come. I used to tell my friend 10 to 15 years ago, I said, I don't understand why Stephen A. and all these other analysts, because that's what he was telling me about him. I was just getting exposed to him. I'm like, I don't see why they don't just go out and do their own podcast. I said, because they are the reason that people watch it. The network's not the reason you watch it. You don't watch it because it's on ESPN. You watch it because if you watch that show, you watch the show because of those individuals, those characters. So why don't they just do their own podcast and make all the money, and just leave ESPN? And he would always argue that they get paid $5, $7, now $15 million a year. So that's hard to walk away. And I'm like, well, once you got 2 years of that, I'm walking away. I'd be an entrepreneur. I wouldn't stay there for 30 years. I don't care how much ESPN was offering. But my point where I was going with this is that I saw that eventually it was going to get to the point where everybody had their podcast. And that's where we are now. We're in that world. And these people who are now getting podcasts are being taught without even thinking about it, I believe, just to do these activities in order to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't think through, who am I? What's my message? What do I really want to share? How is this going to impact the world? Is this going to improve the fight for justice, or this is going to be uh, a a sword for injustice.
Mm.
You know, who's going to be hurt by the statement that I'm making, regardless of what I think is true or not. And as you said, even going even deeper, why do I think it's true?
Yeah.
You know, because I've been taught that. Do I really believe that? Is it part of my cultural givens, as you say? Or is it because I watch Fox every day and that's what they say on Fox, you know,
Yeah.
or Donald Trump says? And it's one thing about Donald Trump that I can't see that anybody would deny at this stage is that he's out for himself. Whether you like his politics or not, whether you agree with his methods and anything else, you cannot argue that he's not out for himself. You can't truly believe that he remotely cares about doing things for the best interest of the country or a certain group of people. He's going to do whatever suits him. And if it's in alignment with, if the country can get something from it too, then so be it. But he's going to definitely do it first and foremost for himself.
Yeah.
And I think in most times it's going to be at the expense of the country. You know, because the country is not designed for the president to do things for himself. That's not how the systems were designed. So he's always going to be at the expense of the country. But, you know, it's finally, to your point, I think that if people are not asking themselves those critical questions at this juncture, then they're dangerous.
Yeah.
Because even if you are not the type of person who will go out and do a violent act or troll someone on social media, but if you are forwarding and liking and sharing messages from individuals who do, then you're just as bad. And that's what you got to be willing to be accountable to, that those set of actions when you decide to say, I'm gonna share, I'm gonna repost this article because it sounds correct. And I was a victim of that. Just real quick, I found on my YouTube wall, it was a video clip of maybe 20 seconds of Dave Chappelle, Steve Harvey, Cedric the Entertainer, and I forget what the woman's name was, but they all four on stage, and it was the 25-year-old Def Jam reunion tribute anniversary, and they were all on stage, and Dave Chappelle let out. Well, I know everybody's wondering if Cat Williams is going to show up, and then the camera pans to Cat Williams sitting at the table right in front of the stage, and then Steve Harvey makes a joke and says, "Yeah, I'm scared as shit," you know. So they made a quick joke, and then it kind of, the clip went off. So I thought it was, relatively new. So I'm sharing it like this is funny because Dave Chappelle would just go right to that situation and speak directly to it instead of that being the grill in the room. So I shared with my brother, and he's like, "Yeah, but that's old." I said, "What do you mean that's old? That just came out recently, right?" I said, "That's just 2 or 3 months old at the most." He said, "No, he said, I saw that before. That's old." So we argued about it almost to the point where we actually said we would bet. And then I looked it up. It was 2017. So somebody had literally just put that up there because it's timely. It's of the environment right now, but it wasn't as big. No one really knew that. That was kind of small within the comedian world, that they had these animosities and battles with each other. But now that it's on a world stage, how timely that clip is. But again, my point is that was me just reposting something without really checking the facts, understanding what I'm doing. And so I said, never again when I get caught like that. I'm never gonna just repost something without either letting someone know I'm seeing this video, explain it. So I had to watch it myself and critically think through before I shared or not shared.
Yeah, that's a great example, and it took a while for me to realize some years ago that the date where it says it's 7 years old or 3 weeks old or 2 days old or whatever, which is typically on a YouTube video, that's just the date that somebody uploaded it. That's nothing to do with when the event took place.
But
So,
that's not on the shorts though. That's the problem. The
so
shorts don't.
it was a short. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
they don't give you that
Yeah.
that date, so you don't have any idea. But you're right. That's the first thing I look at as well.
Yeah. So what I want to do is, so that's a great. I love that example. Yeah, because it takes a little bit of time to check stuff. But here's an example. I mean, this idea of growth and knowing yourself. So a guy that's a good friend of mine nowadays, I'm not going to use his name. I met him probably in 2010, give or take. And it was a time when I was, going through some coach training, and I needed some volunteer clients. And he and I met at a networking event in Connecticut, and we just sat across from each other. Had nothing really in common that we knew of, but we exchanged business cards. So a few weeks later, I needed volunteer clients because I had to practice and write up my case studies for the coaching program that was in. It was Integral Coaching Canada, which is a great program. And there was a group of men. It happened to be all men in this networking group. And I just put a quick announcement out. I need a volunteer client. First come, first serve. If you have something you want coaching on, first person that commits, you got it. And he was like he saw it like immediately. So we did some work together. And again, we became really good friends. But here's what I want to zero in on. At the time, he was a financial director for a multi-million-dollar division of a multi-billion-dollar manufacturing company. And his next promotion would be to CFO for the division. And he was having thoughts about leaving because what he really loved doing was taxes. and so I forget what his specific topic was, but at one point we were talking about his direct reports and how he interacted with them. And he had a sense that he was a little bit kind of hovering or, didn't give them enough freedom, not because he didn't trust them, but he wanted to help them succeed. So if somebody came to him, asked him a question, he would give them like a complete answer. If he asked somebody else a question and they would talk to him, he would then say, well, here's what you should do. And he would tell them what to do exactly. And he said, I think I need to back off a little bit, but I don't know how to do that. So that was the coaching we did. So I gave him a practice. And I just basically said, from now on, when you ask a question of a direct report and they answer you, the only thing you're allowed to say back is thank you. Like you can't give them more information. You can't build on on what they said. You can just say thank you and then be quiet. So then they have to talk. In other words, we're giving the other person more agency in the conversation. So that was really, it was really hard for him at first, but he did it. He was a good guy and he did the work. And eventually, what he discovered over a period of weeks was, number one, that his direct reports were way more, he knew they were good people, but they were way more competent and they could resolve almost every issue by themselves. Number two, he was definitely kind of overbearing with them in a friendly way. Like he wasn't scolding them, but he just gave them way too much information. And then the best one was two of his direct reports started asking him if he was okay because he had stopped doing that kind of overbearing approach and just gave them more space to work. Mm-hmm. So for him, that was this great discovery where he got to know himself better. He was well-intentioned. He was knowledgeable. He was a good guy. He was a good boss. But he needed to back off a little bit so his direct reports could develop on their own and not just do everything he said. So that's a kind of easy example. I think it's easy of getting to know yourself. First of all, he was willing to be coached. He was honest about what he wanted, and he did the practices. That's what we all need to be able to do. A little bit of self-reflection. I think I need help with this. Get help somehow. And then do what has to be done to get better at whatever it is. And getting better at it might be a behavioral change. It might be a thinking change, how I look at different things. Ideally, it's both. If you can change your behavior and be aware of the change and how it affects you, that's ideal because you're dealing with awareness and behavior at the same time. But that's the type of thing that we're speaking about. One last thing, and I'll shut up and you can respond to this. There was another guy in that same group who wasn't interested in the coaching, and he appears a lot on LinkedIn nowadays. I'm still connected to him on LinkedIn. And he's the guy who repeats nonsense online. He's in the business world. He's a decent guy. I liked him when I knew him, but he repeats things that are provably false. And the first time I saw him do that, I wanted to write to him and say, call him Joe. His name's not Joe. Joe, I like you and I respect you, but you're posting things here and repeating things that I can prove to you they're not true. Why are you doing that? And I just decided that's a thankless task, So I just, I pick my spots now. But this one guy who just wanted help and wanted coaching, and this other guy who I haven't seen him put something original on LinkedIn ever. He just reposts other people's stuff. So that's two examples. And I think they're both decent people. The one I know is decent because I know his family. The other guy, I'm sure he's a good father and a good spouse, but he's not doing himself any favors. So that's what we're talking about here. Getting to know myself as deeply as I can. So in conversation, I'm not a mouthpiece for somebody else's viewpoints, but I'm really speaking about what it is that is at my core, in my soul, in my heart. So.
Yeah. I think most people now, this systems that has given our lives that we live under has made so many people lazy that they don't want to do that work that you talk about to come to those conclusions. They don't want to do that deep introspective analysis of who they are and become that aware of their behaviors. Yeah. So they much rather simply just communicate. I hadn't even thought about the fact, because that's not how I'm wired, until I saw a gentleman who wrote the book Super Communicators, Charles Duhigg, something like that. I'm definitely mispronouncing his last name, but
yeah, I think it's Duhigg or Duhig, I think is his name.
Yeah. People communicate differently, kind of what you said, alluded to a little bit as well. People communicate differently based off the channels they're using. Yeah. So if they're going to text, that's going to be different than an email it would be, than a phone call would be, than an in-person conversation would be. Like, you're going to communicate differently depending on which one you're doing. And see, for me, I don't think that way. I think I'm going to communicate the same way each way. So whether I tweet, whether I make a phone call, I'm still going to communicate in the same manner because I had the same intentions. I didn't think that most people thought differently until I heard him lay that out. And I'm like, see, that just really goes to show how people letting technology change them. Yeah. Like I still want my conversations when I'm talking on the phone to be rich. If they're not going to be rich, and I don't want to have that conversation. Yeah. I'd rather move on to something else that's going to be that feels good. The endorphins are aligned, it feels good. And so I don't know if it's just age, but truly being aware of the opportunity to have those conversations, because to me they're less frequent than they used to be. And that's just because everybody's so confused by the system. Yeah. People who are, politically now, if you walk into a room, particularly here in Maryland, and you say you got a mega hat on, that says a lot. You don't have to say a word. You're gonna get greeted in you're gonna create a different energy. There's gonna be some energy around you. Some people may say something to you directly. Some people may do something to you, but you're definitely gonna get people's attention and people's ire. Yeah. And if it was just a Republican hat, it wouldn't do that. That's how much we've allowed ourselves, and that to me is what Trump figured out. Because just from a quick point on that, just from a media and system control, the Democrats were the masters of identity politics for years. And Republicans couldn't quite figure it out. And then Trump came along and said, I'm going to make sure I be the best at this identity politics. And that's the way we go. I'm going to speak to a base of people who don't never get spoken to. And that's who I'm going to identify and get them to say, I might not have shit else, but I'm a proud American. And if you elect me or I elect this man, he can get me back to that feeling of when this country made me its priority. And that's what he's telling. I'm going to make you the priority again and get you back to that time. Because that's when America was great, when that group who felt they were the priority and everything was done for them and they're benefiting. And so, but he's not going to do that. But he knows that class of people, that specific element of society is going to be his ride or die companions. And that's why he's able to make the statement, I can shoot someone on, a street in New York, Manhattan, or whatever, Broadway, whatever street he said, and get away with it. Because we're watching it real time. But, to be honest, and I hope this doesn't come across as offensive, but just an observation. Like, to me, Trump is if you had to write the definition of white supremacy, that's who Trump is. He's the prototype. He's that in his full brigade and full life. That's what he is. But he's showing that I'm supreme to everybody. And so that's what I think that. So black folks, I would say, just be honest, are not that. This is not new behavior from a context.
Yeah.
To be that bold with it is what's new. Like, okay, he's just gonna say it flat out. That's who he is. He doesn't try to sugarcoat it. He's gonna be that at his fullest level. And some of them admire that, which is a twisted way because they're so unhappy with what Biden is doing. So that's would be a reason they would actually vote. They're not going to defend certain policies and things that he's talking about because more likely he's not talking about policies. Right. But see, that's how he's been able to truly just turn the conversation or change the culture of conversation in today's society. He's actually changed the culture of it now. And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to finish by saying, and that to me is, if a person doesn't see that, that's a person you should run from. Because that means they're believing what's been told to them. Then I realize they're just being fed the something good to just make them feel good. But go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example. Even that I mentioned Trump 10, 15 minutes ago, and like I said, I don't want to talk about him, but exactly what his whole life is, since we're talking about him, we may as well do it. Exactly what his whole adult life has been about, which was branding and getting his name in front of people and trying to build on the $11 million, whatever it was that his father left him or gave him. And he wants to be center stage. That's his whole game. And it has been long before anybody ever thought of him as a president of the United States. Like I said, I've said earlier, I grew up in Yonkers. I went to school out at St. John's. I was in Queens. So I was aware of him when he was in his mid to late 20s, when he began appearing on the New York tabloids, and he was on local news at night. And, as this young heir and, kind of brash and arrogant. So my dislike began back in the late 70s and early 80s. That he became president, still, I understand it kind of statistically and what happened politically in the country. Vast of people that so it would help.
Actually, Reggie, you're freezing a little bit there. I'm not sure what happened with the connection, but you're frozen right now. So you said anything, I can't hear you at all. The camera just froze. So yeah, it's still frozen.
All right, but is my voice coming through?
The statement you just made just came through, but your picture still froze.
Okay.
Continue talking.
For about 5 seconds, I saw both of our videos buffering where we both disappeared. And now I think you're frozen too.
Well, I'm here. Can
Oh,
you
you were
see me?
okay. You were just sitting like
Yeah.
Buddha, meditation style. you,
Yeah.
you were perfect. So am I back?
Your voice seems to be back, but the video is still buffering and not clear.
So I'm going to continue if that's all right, as long as my voice is coming through.
Yeah, you might want to turn your camera off just so
Okay,
that
I'll do
folks
that. Yep.
don't think that you're.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So, people that were wealthy and wanted to keep their wealth might have thought he'd be a good guy to have since he's all about money and things. And then there were another category of people who never heard of him until The Apprentice show and Celebrity Apprentice. A few may have heard of him because he has some golf courses and some hotels, but most people didn't know about him. And he became famous on television as the fictional boss of a fictional company, especially the celebrity version of that show. And people thought he was a good leader because he was playing, a fictional boss on television, like thinking that Dennis Franz was a cop because he played Andy Sipowicz on NYPD Blue, or pick one. Ted Danson was a bartender, and
Right.
whatever. So what that brings up for me is something that we're kind of touching on anyway. Is what's my motivation for saying anything? What is my motivation for being in a conversation? And Trump's is consistently, and you said this, it's only about himself. It's self-aggrandizement. What can he say to get what he wants? Whether it's true or not, whether he's going to keep a promise or not. He's not in conversation to learn, which I think is the primary reason to be in conversation generally. Maybe the only time that's not true is if you're a litigator and you're representing your client and you're in conversation in order to win the case, or if you're teaching in medical school and it's not about hearing everybody's opinion, but you want to make sure that the surgeons learn the right thing. But the folks who listened to him, that he was basically pandering to, that he had no intention of helping, they were listening in order to feel better about themselves, because here was a guy who was finally recognizing them. They felt as though they had been left behind, and in some ways they had been, and that's important to note that. And here was the guy who recognized that they were going to left behind, and he was going to bring things back to the way they used to be. How far back they were going to go, nobody really knows. If we had to go back to, Jim Crow days, or be back to enslavement, or back to before women could vote, or I don't know. I don't know when it was great, but that was never clarified. It was a great slogan that succeeded, but there was really no factual meat to it. Because if you ask somebody in MAGA, well, when was America great? Give me a year. There's no good answer to that question. So the conversation itself is, at best, it's a little bit fraudulent.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a genius of it, though, to be honest. I don't know if they did it intentionally or not, but keeping it ambiguous like that means you can't argue about it. Instead of saying, well, it's 1955, and you find a reason why it's not 55, or 1917, and you find a reason. So you leave it vague, and they never have to debate you on that year. So whatever was great in that person's mind, that's the time frame I want to go back to. And Trump doesn't really have to deliver because he's not being specific about where I'm taking you to. That's the part of me that really bothers me about the image they say about him, is they paint him to be so dumb. And I see anything but I don't see dumb at all. I mean, to get to the point, you change politics forever. That's not somebody who's dumb. I mean, he's totally, the Republican Party is Trump's party. What he wants, who he wants to have running the actual Republican National Party. So all that now controls and governs the conversations that people are going to have. Because you can no longer have a political conversation. You know, and people will say that about a person. They said recently at my job, the guy just decided, I guess this was on his mind. He just wanted to share this. That this one other guy that we worked with, who wasn't there at the time, that he was a MAGA. That this guy is a strong MAGA, and he thinks like he felt that the bridge kit was, you know, immigrants to hit the bridge. Like he's really sold on that they're coming to get us, and you know that we need to be at our best. He has guns, like he's totally brought in, and so if you have a conversation with him, as you're saying, he's not going to have a conversation with you to learn anything. He's in a conversation with you to teach. He feels I want to tell you things you don't understand, that you don't know, and if we have a conversation, I'd love to have it and give you and bring you up to my line, and bring you up to where I'm thinking, or around the way that I'm thinking. And that's the sad thing about it. If you're going to have a conversation with someone and you don't learn from it, it's been that mindset, that growth mindset I talk about. If you're having a conversation with somebody and you're both interested in learning, just how much pleasurable that conversation is for both folks and what that leads to. Like I've had people just tell me, and this is something I try as a technique, but I realize it works. That if you look at someone and you ask them a question, and the question is, "How are you doing?" or "How's the day treating you?" and you sincerely look at their eyes, look into their eyes, and pause. Don't say anything else after you ask that question. Most people are shocked to be able to have someone who's willing to listen to that answer.
Yeah.
And they feel good. Some will actually share with you what's really going on. And it feels good to get that off, because we miss that ability to communicate that authentically.
Yeah. Yeah. And ultimately, there's a quote from the poet David White, and he tells a story before he gets to this line, but I'm just going to give the line. If you think about human relationships, and it might be true in the other than human world as well, but it's definitely true in human relationship because of our capacity for language. He basically said the conversation is the relationship. Right? Try to be in relationship without conversation. I mean, at some level you can in a moment or two, or but basically the relationship is sustained by conversation. It begins in conversation, or might begin with a look, or a gesture, but it's sustained by conversation. And being skillful in conversation is important. Being in conversation with an open mind, in order to stay curious, is a big deal. And that's gone, or significantly tainted, in the public discourse of our governing institutions. And that doesn't mean every single elected official is guilty of that, but generally speaking, it's really suffering. And in our media, put social media aside for a second. There are only a few places where you can actually hear some in-depth discourse between people who disagree and do it in a civil, respectful way. Very rare. And that began, before Trump, and it began in the 80s, really, as far back as I can say. And it continues to get worse.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We reached that point in the show, though, where we want to make sure we give people some practical steps, some advice on how they can begin to rebuild their conversation skills. And I know you have some solutions on what they can do to put themselves back on the path to listening and looking to learn.
Yeah. So the basic one is get to know yourself. And that sounds like duh. It sounds like easy, but it's really not easy. You have to do some work there, especially if you think you know yourself already and you haven't done any work. You just think you do. because you've been successful in life, your kids are healthy, great, right? But really get clear on what you believe, why you believe it, and where it came from. Because when you're in conversation, if you're not aware of what you believe, why you believe it, and where it came from, it's in conversation. The conversation has you. You're not really having a conversation. You're being had by what you were given. So question yourself. I mean, there's those of you who read or listen, I have a Substack newsletter and podcast, and they're identical each week. I just read the newsletter, but the last three, today, last Wednesday before, deal with conversation and deal with this idea of knowing yourself. That's one way to get some more information about it. But question what you believe. You hear yourself say something, and if you get a feeling like, wow, do I really? Just question, what do you really believe? And it doesn't mean that you're wrong when you question. You just want to know yourself better. You might question and say, yeah, I absolutely believe that, and here's why. Great. As long as it's something that's truthful, kind, and necessary. If you believe something and you know why you believe it and you know it's false, then you're part of the problem, to put it directly. So yeah, question yourself and your beliefs.
Excellent. Now we transition to the last part of our show, in which we identify a person from either the past or present, currently exhibiting these behaviors of being fully human, who we want to lift up and admire and give recognition to. And I was gonna, I'm letting you go first in this one, or I should suggest you go first in this one, I should say. Do you have anybody in mind?
I usually prepare much better than this. I'll come up with somebody quickly. So I'm gonna actually use someone who there are a bunch. I love language and poets and songwriters, and I'm gonna actually mention somebody who I just bumped into 4 or 5 years ago, and because of the lyrics that this person writes, and I've seen her once in concert in a small venue. She's not famous. Some people might know her, but she came from Germany years ago. But her name is Antje Duvakat, and I bumped into one of her songs probably 5 years ago, and the lyrics just struck me. The title of the song was "Caffeinated Warriors," and I won't try to explain that. But she writes these lyrics that are just wise and like just eloquent and beautiful lyrics across many subjects. She wrote a song about Judas Iscariot, the guy that betrayed Christ, from a perspective of what it was like when Jesus and Judas were growing up together. But she does these great turns. So I don't think you can write like that without being fully human. She doesn't have a narrow view. She has a real gift with language and music. I mean, she writes the melodies too and the harmonies, but just really gifted songwriter. So Antje Duvakat is her name. And I just love listening to her. She's probably, I'm guessing she's like,
Wow, it's actually, you're starting to freeze again. Your picture's frozen and your voice became distorted right here at the end.
But yeah, I admire her and want to go write like her when I grow up.
Yeah, of course, your voice was still a little distorted, but I believe you said you want to be like her when you grow up.
Yeah, joking. Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, mine would be I would say mine would be a gentleman by the name of John Heron. He was my mentor here in Baltimore City, a gentleman that was in his 70s, and I met him. He was a part of I was part of conscious capitalism, and he was part of social I can't believe the name, been out of that for a minute, but it was another group similar to conscious capitalism. So we had a alignment based on the fact that business was supposed to have a higher purpose. And he loved my motto and idea what I had for Baltimore City, and was instrumental in making a lot of connections to key people in Baltimore. Got me in their leadership program, which is really a good mentor to me. And actually really went beyond just a mentor and became really a friend. But he still is a mentor in that context. But he became a friend, and he recently passed about maybe a month ago. I'm sorry. And so he was definitely somebody that was more fully human. He definitely saw how, or he made a point to look to fight injustice. Him and his wife, they were really just great people, really good people to be around. Servants. To give example, they had a neighbor of theirs. Now this couple is white, obviously Irish, and his wife was Irish. Yeah, but anyway, they had a neighbor of theirs, a new neighbor that didn't even know more than maybe 3 years since they knew, had recently relocated within 5 years. And this was a black woman, an elderly black woman who was getting dementia, and they ended up having to move her out of her house and put her in a care home, elderly care home. Well, she had ran behind her bills, so him and his wife went over to her house and just began. She's a collector. This woman was highly collected a lot of things, dolls, still having a pristine collection, toys, or whatever. She had a lot of stuff that was just collector items that she had never used. She had brought, so they were able to package all that up, resell it, put on eBay, and they was able to make enough money to pay her care at that place for 12 months. And they didn't get paid. They didn't charge a fee for it. They didn't say, here's what my cut's going to be. They just did that strictly because they saw this woman was in need and they acted.
Yep.
And that to me is, knowing folks like that, they're rare. And that was an example of seeing another human being in need and taking care of it, because their family wouldn't have done it. And then they even help sell a house, get it fixed up and sell it. And then they're not taking a profit from it. They're not trying to get a cut. They just doing it because it needs to be done, and they're taking action. So I just want to lift them up. John Heron was a great man, and his wife Barbara is still both great people.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, so I know we went over a little bit. Now your picture is coming in excellent. It's clear here at the end of the show. The video, audio is working fine. But we get ready to wrap up. So thank you, Reggie, for choosing a great topic, being engaged, being present here on the show. Thank you, listening audience, whether you listen to us on Facebook, YouTube, live, or you're catching the replay. Thank you for tuning in. If you listen to the replay, hopefully this is something that you're interested in. We're going to put a link to your article, to your newsletter in the video on YouTube, so folks can click on it and get more information. So until next Wednesday at 10 a.m., let's all work to become more fully human.